Right, I'll pass you over to Michael.
Hi guys, this is my book, HypnoSaga, and it's healing the threads of hypnotic history. Um, and it's by Michael Mulville, not Matthew Mulville. That's my son's name. It's his computer. This proves to you how much of a dinosaur I am. But even in my education, I could be described as a dinosaur because I studied Freudian psychoanalysis and Lacanian psychoanalysis. So I kind of studied all of the 19th century stuff of even my master's degree in addiction studies. The primary root of it was psychoanalysis. And even my uh, postgraduate diploma, the primary route was psychoanalysis. So I did study clinical hypnotherapy um, to like what was it, advanced diploma level. Anyway, that's enough about that. Um, this is a fascinating subject I'm introducing. It's about hypnoanalysis, and that's what really matters, not me. So what I would like to say is um, to be absolutely sure, psychoanalysis forms the core of all psychotherapies, dialogical psychotherapies, and counseling. It was the first method to actually formalize dialogical therapy, meaning that like the patient or the client, the patient is sort of an antiquated term, would talk. Hypnoanalysis is it's not classical psychoanalysis. It's a hybrid. It's a hybrid of hypnosis and psychoanalysis. Okay, and it's fractured. So from a purely psychoanalytic point of view, it's not classical psychoanalysis. It was born from necessity. Okay, and it represented in the history of hypnotism a sharp shift away from suggestive therapeutics. So the voice of the mentally ill was in the history of man, as you could call it in psychiatry. Their voice was never heard. It was always voiced over by doctors, psychiatrists, and so on. Psychoanalysis represents that time in history when the voice of the client, the voice of the patient could be heard. And you're probably wondering, well, because there's a labyrinth of techniques in hypnotherapy, you're wondering, oh my God, what's the most important technique? And I have to learn a million of them. And I would say you can bring it down a lot. Most important instrument of all our therapy is our ears and listening. And so the key technique is ignorance and curiosity. And that's an amazingly humble perspective. I hope you would agree. Um, Basically, I'm not an expert on you, and I can't imagine what your universe is like. So I take it from the point of view that I don't know who you are, but I take a key interest in you, your subjectivity, your life, and the story of your illness. And that's how I work from. And to again quote the philosopher John Moriarty, who didn't write about hypnoanalysis, but his quotation is gorgeous. It's from Dreamtime 1994. And it basically synopsizes all you need to know about psychoanalysis and good therapy. From a healed past, healed present, and future may grow. And that's basically the solution focus of that. I'd like to talk to you about hypnosis because don't forget, hypnoanalysis is a brethren of both hypnosis and psychoanalysis. So you may know if what I'm talking about in terms of hypnosis, so I might be just preaching to the converted, but I'll go anyway. In hypnosis, it's an altered state of consciousness with heightened suggestibility. It represents a narrow focusing. You are directly connected to the unconscious mind in an aware state. So you're reaching the hidden depths of the mind. In trances, there's wakefulness, wherein you have a conscious mind acting like a retrieval system that opens a portal to the most mysterious aspects of the human mind. So what I'm doing basically is I'm showing you that in hypnosis you are awake, which is something that in the history of hypnosis took them a long time to understand that. And you know, in contrast to sleep, when we dream, so when we're dreaming, you cannot report accurately and directly and exactly what you're dreaming. And that's the problem with dream analysis. So it's precisely the reason why James Braid in 1843 and Felix de Henin de Cuvelier, 1755 to 1844, clearly distinguished what the psychologist Clark L. Hull would later identify: hypnosis and suggestibility. Hypnosis and sleep have nothing in common. Although often when I do self-hypnosis, I actually fall asleep, but that's probably because I'm that kind of a person. Hypnosis, now this is sort of my own sort of political view of hypnosis. It's something no organization has ownership over. You can't stamp the property mentality upon a phenomenon that occurs naturally within the human psyche. Furthermore, the use of ethical psychoanalysis and psychotherapy of any genre are not practices that can be truly owned within one school. And this is good for us hypnotherapists because we're free to basically use all of those psychotherapies. They're published, and you can use that in your practice. You're only exercising your free will and your capacity, and then your conscience, because ethics is just a matter of conscience. We have free will, and hopefully we'll enact our therapeutics ethically. Um, I say hypnosis is a non-narcotic, but of course, I don't mean to be counterfactual when I say that, because of course some hypnosis was induced with narcotics, and that would have been either like with like the history of hypnosis, you had the shaman, but also in medicine, and that would have been to help profoundly traumatized soldiers to go into trance to heal them. It's a non-narcotic. So hypnosis, I'm talking the normal hypnosis that you guys do. It's non-narcotic. It's non-invasive. It's health increasing. It can be learned easily, and I think that the theatrics they don't convey how easily it can be learned. Um, you had the exceptional doctor, just to show you how easy it is. The exceptional doctor, Dr. A. A. Mason. You might want to know how he learned it. Well, he just picked up the book, Hypnoanalysis. But you see, he was already a very serious scholar anyway. He wrote in 1945. He was the guy that treated itchy thiosiform erythema of Brock. You probably know all about that anyway. It was published in 1952, and Nancy had the patient had terrible skin problems throughout his body. Well, he was granted a research grant after he did that successfully, but he recoiled in horror because everybody was ringing him up, assuming he could cure everything, assuming hypnosis was a cure-all for everything. So he basically reverted back to training in psychoanalysis because he didn't want to be seen as a conveyor belt for a system that could be a cure-all to everything. And I understand why he did that. And I'm free to talk to you about why Freud abandoned hypnosis, why he may have abandoned it. Anyway, um, so I'll talk to you about free life, and it's about options, choices, freedom, and that's the product of a positive, non-authoritarian, ethical hypnotherapy, bringing that to the patient or to the client. But dark hypnosis, which is aborted from clinical hypnosis, ethics have been aborted in it, and that can bring manipulation and deceit. And that's why you need to have ethics. In the minds of the earliest humans, hypnosis was not there. Now it's here. It's like a tap. It can be regularly turned on and turned off in our day-to-day reverie, or when we are so inwardly focused that nothing else seems to matter. And if I haven't made it clear within this text, hopefully I make it clear now, the symptom is an enactment of an unconscious trance. Okay? And I mean, like that's something that would have to be worked through. As a working through is a term you use in psychoanalysis. Naturally, clients worry, can they leave that state of their, and within the symptoms, usually another symptom, another symptoms. That's why there's a multitude of symptoms within it. And they have seen the villainy of stage shows. Hypnotists might use a word-laden dehypnotization script. I'm talking clinical hypnotherapy, but even this is sort of overdoing it, where you count from 0 from 5 down to 0, saying wide awake, stretch and smile. This would be hyperbolic, smacks of urgency, an external agent to the subject being required to use heterosection and urgency. So just show you how easy hypnosis is. James Esdale in 1846 could demesmerize heavily operated patients facing or within the extreme surgeries, and he lists all of the surgeries he did in India. Can Michael explain the reference regarding symptoms in a bit more detail? Yeah, basically, so the symptom would form a negotiation in the unconscious mind, and therefore, to know the root cause of the symptom, you'd have to go to the primary trauma, which may be in childhood, and then the secondary trauma, which may have been activated like in later life, and that's what hypnoanalysis means to do. But just where you are compelled to do an addiction, but you don't want to do it because you're obviously, if you think about it, nobody wants to be like a drug addict enacting the addiction, but they do it from compunction, and that compunction comes from the unconscious mind. So you're reenacting it. And a lot of trauma is a compunction repetition. You are almost compelled, and there's no brakes on that. And so with good therapy, hopefully we'll be able to put the brakes on the symptoms. And I say symptoms, but the client also is not knowing. The client does not know the root cause of their symptom. But through hypnosis and through analytical investigation, they can reach the root cause, and they can identify the multi-layers of the symptomology that lies underneath that. If you have anything else to ask me, I'm all for it. So where was I? Yeah, James, hypnosis. So basically, did I say to you that you would just rub your eyes and you could go out of it? That's how James Braden would instruct you to go out of hypnosis. Of course, you could throw some water on a person; they'll leave hypnosis, or else the client will leave hypnosis in their own time. So all I'm trying to show you is how natural hypnosis is, and it's not too difficult. The difficulty lies in the therapy. So hypnosis occurs in the mind, and this is a little bit cerebral. It can leave permanently through gross material deterioration, or when we return to an inorganic state of death, and that's a little bit too obvious. But we're not born with hypnosis, okay? So when you're born, and then actually I've actually read the birth trauma by. So what I want to say is, if I haven't said it in my essay, that all psychoanalysis comes from hypnosis and from the study of the unconscious mind. So it's a little bit counterfactual to say that psychoanalysis truly abandoned hypnosis. So just remember that. But in terms of James Braid, he developed the term neurohypnology. What does that mean? It means nerve, hypnos, sleep, logos meaning study. And he also called it monoideism, which is a fixation of the mind on a single idea to the exclusion of others. Naturally, when doing tasks involving hyperfocus, this amounts to a superpower. So if I haven't said it already, the human mind originally did not have a capacity for hypnosis. So our earliest ancestors, they didn't have conscious awareness. Around some time in our evolution, we developed conscious awareness. So that's an absolute core and necessary requirement for all hypnosis. So, but through concentrated attention on a single idea, in hypnosis, the mind goes from external focus to losing conscious grip. It goes, this is talking psychoanalytical parlance, so forgive me if it's pretentious, but can be. It goes through the passage of the preconscious mind. So you're going inwards to the preconscious mind, attention narrows, focusing inward, the superego is switched off, and the consciousness meets the ego, which is the word for the I, and the pre-conscious is the is sort of like I. You're going into the id, which is called the it, and that's the unconscious mind. But we do it naturally. So, as I said before, when we're enacting a symptom is a compulsion repetition, and it's also a negotiated trance. So your subconscious mind is powerful, but it's also causing the trouble, and we need to negotiate with it. Um, I want to talk to you about ancient hypnosis. I hope you'll bear with me because I talk about our earliest ancestors. We must acknowledge that the traditions, such as the sleeping temples of antiquity, I know you've probably heard this before, um, the shamanic trances of the Incas and the Aztecs, the Aboriginal Dreamtime and songlines, they served as a vast ancestral memory bank where powerful healing and trance engagements and manifestations of the unconscious mind occurred. So I think the Aboriginal songlines are completely, and Dreamtime are completely fascinating. And as a Western person, I'm not sure if I fully understand it, but I want to say it anyway. In this incursion into the ancient world of hypnosis, consider the Aboriginal songline as a most awesome example of the titular phrase from Joseph Murphy, which is in 1969 was written, "The power of your subconscious mind." Um, I don't think he conveys it as powerfully as the songline, the Aboriginal songline. It acted absolutely and still acts as sophisticated navigation systems that were solid manifestations of the unconscious mind. Many Aboriginal cultures of Australia, the songlines, they were offering dreaming tracks, oral maps encoded in song, dance, and art. Each line follows the path of an ancestral being across the land. And by singing the correct verse in the right sequence, a person can traverse vast distances, hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometers without a physical map. As you know, I'm an Irishman, and a lot of our people were sent to Van Diemen's Land. And if you went missing and you were on your own, you'd starve to death. But if you had, God help you, if you had an Aboriginal, you could survive because through their song lines, they would know their way around. So the natural landmarks, the water sources, the changes in terrain, the directions, the sacred sites, these are all in the song line. By knowing the songs, that's how survival through spatial, vast territories of country, that's how you could survive following the law and spiritual customs tied to each place. Song lines are more than mythology, they're cognitive maps handed down through generations that involve also cosmology, survival, as I told you before, because if you're not knowing where you're going, there's absolutely no way you'll survive. So that's just one aspect. The sleeping temples, I think they're quite useful to understand them. The banality of trance, as I said, is a part of day-to-day life. So you could be watching the TV or reading a book, and these are the examples we give people to basically offset the trauma caused by stage hypnotherapy to our profession. So we are deliberately looking to prepare positive expectations of going somewhere deep inside. The ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans of antiquity, they understood this. The seeker pre-initiating incubation is the innermost part of the temple. They were educated by prayer, ritual, and ceremony. So that's like your pre-talk, you could call it. You're preparing them for the trance, and they were prepared to have a healing dream, possibly involving a deity such as Imhotep or Asclepius. The seeker will go deep within the bowels of the temple. It'll be dimly lit. be silence. And as you might know from Mesmer, silence is a powerful deepener of hypnosis. And instruments would be played like the lyre, which was also used successfully to treat a king's insanity. The Aztecs, Incas, Native Americans, their temescals, the sweat lodges, they were used for purification, for spiritual purification. They developed healing psychosomatic therapies involving chanting, prayer, use of herbs, shamanic trance that would initiate the shaman into the underworld. So all of a sudden, I'm going to have to leapfrog into now and to see why hypnosis is something that people are afraid of, given the fact that it's such a lovely past. Well, you see, you have a person in trance on stage, and they, in fairness, they might look like they've been overdosed or inebriated. The volunteer is asked to humiliate themselves, to make a fool of themselves. The subject obeys, their free will appears amputated. So that's what the public sees. And then an equation goes into their mind that they equal hypnosis, sadly. They equal it to coercion, mind control, and manipulation. It becomes a repugnancy. But it's not. But it is to them. So you have stage hypnosis, alien abduction regressions, medical clairvoyancy, the concept of mass suggestion and propaganda. They're all byproducts of hypnotherapy's uneven public history. Then you have the rise of totalitarianism, which brought with it menticide, or which is the death of the mind, a term that was coined by Juice Merleau. The Rape of the Mind is the book. It was written by a person that was in the Dutch resistance, and he was a Jew, so he cared deeply about studying the weaponization of mass hypnosis. So that's what hypnotherapists must reckon with. It's sort of like a penance for our sins, that we have to have frequently asked questions, and we have to explain what hypnosis is. Even today, you got like articles written that are, and I was reading a mainstream article, and I was shaking my head at every single godforsaken paragraph that was written in it. One hypnotherapist was interviewed, and he said that critical thinkers make bad candidates for hypnosis. And I mean, that's not true, but he's again reinforcing the tired idea that only gullible people can be hypnotized, contradicting decades of research suggesting otherwise. Then a psychiatrist was interviewed in the article to save the day. And of course, he went and he blamed hypnotherapy for the eterogenic condition of false memory syndrome. However, hypnotherapists don't need to beat themselves up about that one either. The eterogenic condition of false memory syndrome is something that has been done consciously by clinical psychologists to patients. It's been done by psychotherapists and so on. It's all to do with unclean language and nothing to do with being in a hypnotic state or being a hypnotherapist. And so I think that we can absolve ourselves of that alleged sin, which we haven't committed. But if you look to stage hypnosis again, it's not just misinformed medical professionals that feed these myths. Mesmeric stage shows, which have been around since after the time of Mesmer, they were lucrative ways to exploit human vulnerability, and why not? That's what people have been doing since the beginning of time. And it gave rise to suppositions that hypnosis can eliminate free will, this Svengali-like effect. So you had a whole genre of writing, which again helped to cause damage. You had Svengali, which was written, George Marius Trilby, The Tragedy of the Wedding by Julian Hawthorne. His dad wrote Scarlet Letter, fantastic book. I hate to say it, but the Tragedy of the Wedding is still a bloody good read, even though it's not exactly kosher for hypnotherapists to say they like this type of fiction. There's even a great story by Irk Manchatrian, but it all boils down to what it does for hypnotherapy, and of course, is suggesting that homicide and suicide is is correlated. Um, if hypnotherapists didn't have to suffer enough, the 20th century had to happen for us, and then that brought on even more cults, more authoritarian regimes, mass psychosis. Now, people weren't trying to understand these things by reading intelligent books like The Origins of Totalitarianism or Banality of Evil by Hannah Arendt. No, instead, they decided to blame mass hypnosis and to blame it on hypnosis on everything from fascism to Jonestown. So so now let me explain how the mind heals. So now that we've kind of understood how our profession has been gaslit, now we can move on to a more positive things. Tom, you're
Sorry. No, I think you answered the question that was put up there, and I managed to answer another one for you. So we're good to continue.
okay. So how does the mind heal? Um, the unconscious is the seat of the neurosis. That comes from Sigmund Freud, but that has to be unpacked. And the psychopathology, so that's psychopathology means it's another fancy word um, for a disease of the mind, and that's layered deeply in the unconscious. The symptom, the disorder, the true origin of the addiction, the phobia, the obsessional compulsions, the hysteria, all of these things, the hypochondriasis, they're all sort of like the the meat and the gravy and the potatoes of psychoanalysis. Um, at a conscious level, they absolutely haven't got a clue of what's going on, because if they did, they would cure themselves, don't you think? So they are basically painful repetitions of traumatic experiencing. So like you said the word repetition compulsion. And so you could say that it's a negotiated compunction to repeat. Um, and that's what has to be worked through. And we call that working through. So the symptom represents a return of the repressed as a psychological memory at the level of the body. That's how I understand psychosomatics. Um, and what I would say is you're manifesting through behavior, suffering, and somatic expression. So Sigmund Freud said that the unconscious is the seat of the neurosis. The statement marked a significant leap in understanding psychopathology. Freud also contended that the ego is not master in its own home, which means that we're not truly in control of our mind. And it's a worrying thought. But it underscores the unconscious power on the conscious. So in psychoanalysis, you're kind of like, you are unveiling the unconscious control it has over our conscious. How do we know the unconscious exists? Slips of the tongue, dreams, parapraxis, it reveals, and jokes, they reveal the unconscious intentionality that lies behind them. And of course, Freud would have written all about that. So the neurotic is plagued by phobias, obsessions, compulsions, hysteria. If you want to read about hysteria, read Andrew Scull's book on hysteria. It's absolutely brilliant. I read it and I loved it. In contrast, the psychotic, well, at least I don't like Lacan, but so forgive me for having to feel compelled to still quote him. But he said, and I don't speak French, so my pronunciation is awful. You have to forgive me as well. Le ciel ouvert. So that's the term for the sky is open with the psychotic. So you don't really, technically speaking, in psychoanalysis, analysis is contraindicated for a lot of reasons. You wouldn't want to lie a person down on the couch, the traditional couch of psychoanalysis person. It's psychotic. Keep them face to face, eye to eye, and find out, are they psychologically in a good place. And then you'll find out for yourself if they're open to therapy. Because believe it or not, psychotics do want to talk. They want to talk about the exogamous aspects of their condition that is ignored by psychiatry. Um, the unconscious mind holds the key to psychopathology. The history of mind reveals the impotence of the authoritative medical doctor discourse, which claims to fix the patient through expertise. And you could see the disastrous consequences that had. Before Freud, psychiatry was light years behind in understanding neurosis, hysteria, obsession, the complexities of sexuality, the inner world of the psychotic, the profound depths of psychopathology. It was locked within a narrow descriptive framework, and you could call the current DSM, whatever it is, 5. We could go on for 5 million, for as far as I know. I mean that hyperbolically, of course, but basically all it is just an example of neo-Kraepelian language: description, description, observation, observation, description, straitjacketing the world of the client, not at all interested in their inner world. So it was locked within a narrow descriptive framework, focusing on cataloging behaviors, labeling disorders. You might think that Freud's abandonment of hypnosis severs the connection to trance work, but that's actually just a wrong assumption. When you lie a person down and they're in loss and free association, I could argue that they're actually in trance. Okay. Also, Willem Steckel and Otto Rank recognized the immense gains, the contribution of learning about the unconscious mind, birth trauma, Oedipal complex. All of that was learned when patients were in trance. So I don't think that fully psychoanalysis divorced hypnosis. And if it did divorce, hypnosis was a strange kind of divorce, because it kind of kept going back to it in a way. Psychoanalysis, it's an outlier. It gave primacy to the voice, to subjectivity, and to the world of the patient rather than the expert. And that's a good thing, I think. Going to mesmeric therapy, well, you see, mesmeric therapy is sort of different because it's non-verbal. So it's shockingly different. And I think it also forms the basis of all psychotherapies. And people who want to kind of denigrate what Anton Mesmer did, it's a bit like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You've got a lot of people who talk, but they won't investigate, so they make easy assumptions. And I want to say that actually I better tell you it's going on in mesmeric therapy first. It's called animal magnetism, and it's of course inherently non-verbal, which is actually fascination at its core when you think about it. Non-dialogical. Mesmer taught in pictures, not in words, for 3 months. He didn't bother talking for 3 months. And if you want to learn more, watch the movie Mesmer. It's made in 1994. It's not bad. So it relies on gestures, gazes, manipulation of objects, believed to be magnetized, and belief in the animal magnetism. So it's sort of like, that's why hypnotherapists don't like it, is because like it believes that the power comes from the therapist. Okay, so regarding Mesmer's love of the nonverbal, and I have a nonverbal autistic son, so that's why I studied it with such passion. Kerner quotes Mesmer saying that during this time, all objects possessed for me a new form. This suggests Mesmer gravitated towards a pictorial, intuitive form of cognition. I think that a lot of autistic people, they think in pictures. And I'm not saying that Mesmer was autistic, but I'm saying that I really can, that's what I kind of understood, that he taught in pictures. He taught that words were not powerful enough to describe big concepts. Walford, another of Mesmer's contemporaries, echoed the statement, noting that Mesmer believed thinking without words through direct intuition was the pinnacle of thought. This aligns with the mechanism of hypnosis, which depends on visualization and imagination. Would you agree that both of which are fundamentally pictorial and closely tied to the unconscious mind? So I'm wondering, is the unconscious mind, is it all pictures? Is that what it is? Does it contain pictures, images, and symbols? Despite controversy, Mesmer's techniques gained public attention. Yeah, when celebrated pianist Maria Teresa Paradis became a devoted patient, prompting Mesmer to move to Vienna to Paris. You'll see it in the movie, that case history being depicted, but I'm not sure it was that accurate. Okay. Animal magnetism features several defining traits, abreactive therapy. So an abreaction is when you are having a therapeutic crisis, but his therapeutic crises were very, very dramatic. Heidegger would have changed that. They would become less dramatic, thank goodness. So you also had, within the mesmeric treatment, of course, you'd have patient to patient, but for the first time, you had group mesmeric therapy because you could all like hold the rods and so on, and but it was non-dialogical, and it was a form of non-verbal hypnotherapy. But you see, Mesmer did something which every one of you can learn from, is that he would, before the therapy would begin, he would meditate on his patient getting better. Lovely, beautiful. He would meditate on seeing them transform and getting better. So he offered an emotional, possibly non-verbal expression of psychodeurosis and trauma. What I'm trying to say is, I think within the mesmeric therapeutic crisis, you see an enactment of the patient's trauma, and that's why it had a healing agency. So in a way, it was outcome focused because he was sort of releasing the true abreaction, the trauma, and also because he was contemplating how these patients would be better, but also because he believed, and they believed they would be better. Now, you have post-mesmerists, and these are the people that created your hypnotherapy. So that's why, but that's not the only reason why we should remember them. But I think that would be a reason enough to remember them. They modified mesmeric therapy, and through adaptations, you develop clinical hypnosis and hypnoanalysis and clinical hypnotherapy. So you had the Goan monk Abbe Faria, and he was Portuguese Indian. So he was from 1756 to 1819. He found mesmeric inductions too tedious. I think a lot of people did. So he emphasized visualization and verbal positive suggestion as tools for behavioral change. And of course, James Braid also sought to improve induction methods. And I think that's why one of the reasons why Freud abandoned therapy is because his induction methods he might have found too laborious. So, if you've ever heard of Henin de Cuvelier, some people would think that he was the father of modern hypnotherapy. Remy Cody's book would suggest that, but he introduced yoga-based progressive muscular relaxation, which I think is vital for people who've been traumatized at a somatic level to release the trauma in a non-verbal way, the tension, the trauma that's been deposited in the level of the body, because the body knows no chance. Psychopathology is of course determined unconsciously. So through deep affirmations, he was also a general in the French army. He had a good reason to learn how to psychologically empower himself. Um, and through progressive muscular relaxation, you can release blockages. And if you think about it, somatic and blockages. And that's exactly what Mesmer was also doing. And it's probably what you're doing too when you're treating trauma. Now, you had figures like Emile Coué, every day in every way I'm getting better and better. Hippolyte Bernheim, I'm reading his book at the moment. John Martin Charcot, not so easy to read, and he wanted to basically conquer an understanding of hysteria, and he failed. And please ask me why. They're often like lumped together as the predecessors to Freud. Huye was known, as you said, for the mantra, and he championed autosuggestion. But that has got nothing to do really with what psychoanalysis will become. But Freud did study under Charcot, and his work helped pave the way for psychoanalysis. And the details of 19th century treatments, they just misunderstood and mistreated women diagnosed with hysteria. And they even thought that like hysteria was only something that women could suffer from, but men also suffer from. They also thought that only rich people suffer from hysteria, poor also suffer from it. There was also an isolation type of therapy for hysteria. Read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I read it, and it vividly describes how women would be put into a room, told to rest, no reading, no writing, not allowed. That was bad for their brains. Actually, this treatment was absolutely horrific. Because doctors misunderstood mental illness by maintaining an aloof observer evidence stance. And so this is evident in erroneous historical diagnosis. So basically, when Bloyer called schizophrenia dementia praecox, that's not what it is. Schizophrenia is not dementia. When Bettelheim basically blamed autism on refrigerator mothers, he was absolutely incorrect. Dialogical therapies value subjectivity over objectivity. It prioritize the lived experience of patients, what their world means to them, over medical interpretations. It's a humanistic approach which is totally absent in the DSM. So how about Pye-Segure and Henin de Cuvelier? Well, with Pye-Segure, you start getting dialogue-based therapy through Victor Ross's patient, who was a peasant, but in trance, he transmogrified, being somebody so intelligent. And of course, you also, at this period, you see the birth of medical clairvoyancy, where people were able to kind of diagnose other people in the mesmeric trance. And that was actually used in medicine. Anton Mesmer's approach to therapy, it was authoritarian and megalomaniacal in philosophy. The animal magnetist had, through interplanetary influences, proprietorship of an invisible fluid which could heal, because there was only one disease and only one cure, animal magnetism. So he relied on theatre, authoritarian, intense direct gazes, and various ascending and descending hand passes. So you can see with the post-Mesmers a rebellion against this way of doing things. So you had people like Armand Marie Jacques de Chassenay, Marquis de Pye-Segure, 1751 to 1825. He actually had his own society. He developed his own society. They made lots of clinical notes. Sadly, none of it has survived, which is heartbreaking. I find it heartbreaking anyway. I'd have loved to have got my hands on it. They could potentially, these people, Cuvelier and Pye-Segure, have been sort of like the forerunners of Pinel, unshackling the mentally insane in the Salpêtrière. because they were actually allowing the patient to speak, but their work did not create a talking cure movement. As I said, Marquis de Puysegur, he came from a French aristocratic family. His brother Antoine Hyacinthe and Maxine Hyacinthe also trained in animal magnetism and were members of Mesmer Society of Universal Harmony. These members would explore the principles of Mesmer. Puysegur introduced the principle of artificial somnambulism and the idea of developing rapport with his clients, which is vital to the process of modern day psychological therapy. Puysegur would later organize and create his own mesmerist group in 1789, Société Harmonique des Amis Réunis. The group had some 200 members, and it included people of the Elysian aristocracy. The therapists in Puysegur society were required to be supervised, report what was the patient's ailment or condition accurately, how the patient was treated, and what was the outcome of the therapy. In other words, Puysegur was acquiring a very scientific, ethical approach to treatment. And of course, sadly, all records, as I said, were lost. He introduced the concept of artificial somnambulism, which involves inducing a sleep-like state in individuals, and it marked a crucial development in the understanding of altered states of consciousness and contributed to the later emergence of hypnotism. Victor Ross was a 23-year-old peasant, and in hypnosis, he would talk about grave issues. So this is where Puysegur would differ from classical psychoanalysis. In classical psychoanalysis, if I talk about the stuff that hurts me, I'm encouraged to continue and continue and continue talking. But Puysegur would intervene. He would use suggestion and visualizations, which I think is sort of like maybe Ericksonian in some way. And he would help stir things to a brighter path using distraction, which is what hypnosis is, isn't it? So he leverages the suggestibility of individuals in altered states to promote psychological well-being. I'm not sure if that's good psychotherapy, but anyway, he believes listening to people in trance was vital for the cure of diseases. But as I said, an analyst would not interrupt the analyst's hand at all. That would be not kosher. Puysegur learned that instead of experiencing a violent crisis matched with a state of intense agitation, as per Mesmer, his patients went into an intense state he called artificial somnambulism. The first person who educated Puysegur was Victor Ross. You might think, well, what the hell has that got to do with anything? If we go to Joseph Breuer treated Anna O, and the entire hypnotherapy that you do in hypnoanalysis was based on a woman named Anna O, whose real name is Bertha Poppenheim, and she taught Joseph Breuer how to treat her. And I don't know what's happening now. So she taught Joseph Breuer how to teach her. So, if I can continue, the phenomenon of divided consciousness was later discovered by other therapists. For example, Charles Proyen, he died in 1844. He was a French doctor who brought mesmerism to USA in 1836, whereas popular lectures were published in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal. Proyen witnessed a deep unconscious wisdom at first hand. This is really, really fascinating when I think about it, which promoted him a desire to learn animal magnetism. Dr. Proyen, so basically mesmerism traveled all the way to North America. And if you want to read all about that, read about the cultural aspect, the cultural history of mesmerism. Read Credulity by Emily Ogden. Dr. Proyen had a very complicated nervous disease, and that was treated by mesmerism. He consulted a Dr. Chapelain, and Dr. Chapelain employed a woman named Madame Villeter, and she would go into somnambulistic clairvoyancy, and she would use her gifts in trance to diagnose and treat Dr. Proyan. And again, it sort of emulates how there is another person within us, a third person. The hypnotherapist Etienne Eugene Azam, 1822 to 1892, also had a patient with alternating personalities called Valida X. Her personalities he described in detail. Books in the 20th century, such as Ernest Hilgard's Divided Consciousness, Multiple Controls in Human Thought and Action, will show hypnotherapists have continued to and made a connection with the topic of identifying dissociated multiple personalities, and with the publication in the novel Sybil in 1973 by Flora Rita Schreiber, the topic would also become a popular matter of public discussion. So dissociative states point to the idea that there will be multiple controls within a person mind, and so this may offer a tremulous anxiety and maybe a criticism of past life regression, future life regression, where if there's already potentially so many persons living within us, is it good to go back? I don't know. The existence of dissociated states has consequences for the nature of consciousness and identity. So Pisager was the first to imply that different personalities can exist in people, and we also learned it from Pisager. Would it be helpful to? I'll give you. I can give you a list of books off the top of my head. We also learned from Pisager that by assessing the unconscious mind, we can find a much deeper personality within us. Pisager learned that one kind word, a feeling of goodwill, one kind look, was so important in care and therapy, which is believed to foster the conditions for healing and growth. Victor Rass was clearly a very talented hypnotic subject that achieved the deepest layer of trance possible. Braid would understand that hypnotic levels vary between light, medium, and deep. So I mentioned Henan de Cuvelier. He recognized even symptoms are an unconscious form of trance. So, but this is interesting. He formulated a panic attack as a syncope, which means a temporary loss of consciousness, whilst a phobia called a pseudo-syncope, which is semi-consciousness. I find that very interesting. Anna O, then. I mentioned Anna O from Joseph Breuer, 1893. He quit psychoanalysis. He ran like mad because Anna O had a phantom pregnancy, and she was claiming she was having this baby, and he ran the scene. That's an example of the positive transference. You also have a negative transference. So remember, when you have a transference, you also have a counter transference, and both have to be controlled in order for therapy. So so say I, therapist, have to control my counter transference, but then you have to work with the transference, because the transference holds the seed to psychopathology, and there is where it lies, and that's what you have to work through. And she called the methods that she was using the chimney sweeping or the talking cure. She would describe her experience of verbal catharsis under hypnosis, and Breuer would help to regress her to traumatic events using light hand pressure on her forehead. Her unusual symptoms included hydrophobia, so she was actually afraid of, she wouldn't drink water, and it actually related to a trauma relating to a dog drinking water out of her bowl. She would also only speak in English, and she would not speak in German, even though German was her first language. So the therapeutic method marked a shift in power dynamics. The patient became the expert on their own experience. And of course, that foreshadows Carl Rogers' statement that the client is the expert on themselves. Rogers 951. Anna O's case, it revealed the process of transference, which is a cornerstone of psychoanalysis. So if you want to know what hypnoanalysis is really about, it really is about. Of course, you can borrow from other therapies, but you have free association and dream analysis. Okay, and that's also very important. But you know what I think is great about hypnoanalysis is that I've fallen in love with my dreams lately, but I love sleep and I don't want to write down the dream, and I end up interpreting my dreams after I dream, but I'm still in a pre-conscious state, and but I've fallen totally in love with my dreams. But I dare say that if I went to one of you guys, I wouldn't necessarily be able to remember my dreams. But what you could do to compensate for that is you could bring me into trance, and then you could ask me to have a therapeutic dream or to dream about my psychopathology. And I think that's also great. And please don't underestimate the power of that and also of lucid dreaming, because in trauma, we can suffer from absolutely horrific nightmares. But if we can learn how to control our dreams, we can control our sleep, and then we can sleep without the impingement causing insomnia. Unlike ancient sleep temples, which relied on fixed interpretations, so fixed interpretations don't really work. Freud sought collaborative meaning making between analyst and patient, abandoned hypnosis for sure, but basically you had a conversion of that, which means if I have a dream, okay, I go to you and you might give me an interpretation of that dream based on I'm giving you the manifest content, and you are using associations, and through those associations, we might converge upon an analysis or an interpretation. If I say I agree with your interpretation, that means the interpretation works and it's accorded. You might think, well, what the hell is a phantom pregnancy? And if you think that it's something nonsensical, you're wrong. It's very real. And I'm not saying you don't believe it, but I mean, you must remember that people who suffered from war neurosis and shell shock were regarded as malingerers. People were denying the actuality of their conditions, which is so disgusting. But yet we still occupy a position that doctors know it all, that expert discourse is not challenged through intelligent criticism. A phantom pregnancy, it's probably something that you never heard of. So I wanted to present you a case history of a phantom pregnancy to show you the suffering that's there. I'm presenting you the facts of a condition and its lived reality via an interview titled Vintage Psychiatric Interview, Pseudo Pregnancy in a Tired Mother. Although the symptoms appear physical, the patient believes the symptoms are caused by a nervous condition, a hysterical neurosis with a somatic expression. The patient is in big pain and feels sad that she is neglecting her family, especially her two children. She speaks about how her pregnancy drained her completely and that she was rendered anemic. She reports poor sleep. Her nerves are wrought with low body weight. She has pronounced difficulty eating. The reality of her pseudo pregnancy, she explains, as her tendency to get very constipated with digestion issues. She takes laxatives, which ceases to work. When she gets disappointed, her belly becomes prominent and she can swell up in less than an hour. Even when she is happy, her stomach can inflate. Her clothes no longer fill her. It causes her to be angry and embarrassed, especially when people give up their train seat for her, thinking she is pregnant. The point of presenting you this case of hysteria is twofold. One, to show you how symptoms are created at the level of the body, with its abridgment to the psyche plus soma. You can also possibly empathize with my deepest feeling of how pitiful it is to read later reports from World War I doctors calling patients with other hysterical symptoms like war, neurosis, malingerers, a charge that would also be faced onto the traumatized and shell-shocked of both world wars respectively. And so now to hypnoanalysis. Hypnoanalysis, as I said, is fracturated. It's not pure psychoanalysis. It was a wartime innovation, necessity being the mother of all things. During the World Wars, it re-emerged to treat shell shock, and I wouldn't be inclined to be celebrating the fact that it was a goal orientated, it was a solution based model. Why? Because when you're treating these people, remember, you're getting them, you're mending them. And if you're a doctor, only a sadist would enjoy that. You're mending them so they can go back to war, so they've been further traumatized, or they can be brought back to their mother and father in a body bag. That's the reality of what war is. A more, it's a directive, pragmatic approach, hypnoanalysis, and of course, it was born not in the private consultation rooms of the Freudian clinic. It was born in military hospitals. It was short term. It could go on for six months, 6 days a week or 7 days a week, maybe 252 hours of contact hours. And so when I would say that's exactly what it was. And it was also depicted in the 1946 movie Let There Be Light, which was banned because they thought it was unpatriotic. The US Army thought it was unpatriotic to depict wounded soldiers. But it had a fantastic curability. It was amazing to see these people healed. But then, don't worry, about 5 years later, psychopharmacology took over, telling bye-byes to hypnoanalysis, and because there's money to be made in treating psychopathology with drugs, as there is money to be made in treating pain with drugs. And as you know, our world runs on money. So poets like Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, I remember studying these people as a young man, a young kid actually. They would have also were treated. So Wilfred Owen was treated by Dr. Arthur Brock and Siegfried Sassoon by Dr. W.H.O. Rivers. So when you have the poppy, you're also commemorating these people. And as hypnotherapists, you have the power within you, within your clinical armamentarium, to indeed treat all varieties of war psychoneurosis. And there was an incredibly brave Dr. Robert Lindner, who I admire unceasingly. He wrote, he adapted this war-related treatment to forensic populations, to psychopaths, to murderers, to rapists, to Nazis, to communists. He believed truly in the ethos of what a prison is, which is, in a humanistic way, is actually a correctional facility. He did write Rebel Without a Cause. That has got absolutely nothing to do with the movie. He also wrote Stone. So Rebel Without a Cause is about 46 chapters long. What does each chapter represent? Each chapter represents one contact hour. He had 46 contact hours he had with the psychopath. Not something I'd recommend you guys to do. Robert Lindner was in a prison. He was somehow protected. He was assaulted by him, by the way. He nearly killed by him. But yeah, he was somewhat protected. And also, when he treated psychosis, remember, he used hypnosis, but he was negotiating whether he should use it or not. And then he may not have used, but he used some form of talk therapy with these incredibly difficult clinical populations. And I love Robert Lindner. And if you've told me, I mean, like, being a parent, we don't get much pleasure from, we don't get much reward, only love for our children. But you could show me your reward by saying, well, Michael, I'm going to read Rebel Without a Cause. I'm going to read the 50-minute hour, which is full of case histories like that. And I'd be very, very happy because your mind will be opened. Lindner believed hypnosis could dissolve transference and provide more direct insight. And I think that's why hypnotherapists, that's one good thing you have to remember is you probably are melding the transferential relationship when you bring a person to trance. So you can structure trance into like you induce it, which is suggestion, you induce it, you maintain it, and you deepen it. And then you allow them to talk perhaps, and afterwards you make a post-hypnotic suggestion. So that's what you're going to do after the trance is over. He cautioned against using hypnoanalysis with individuals unable to form therapeutic alliances. It's tough treating psychopaths, and it is very tough treating people with narcissistic personality disorder. Reed Kohlberg, he's a brilliant psychotherapist. He developed object relations, and he developed a system for treating it. So I mean, I want to say that Lindner, he wasn't doing himself much favors. I said he was assaulted and nearly killed. He treated a Nazi. He was a Jew. He treated a Nazi, which shows how much he was dedicated to reforming people. But as I said, like he probably was suffering from stress. He was a chain smoker, and eventually that prematurely ended his life. Um, Contemporary psychotherapy has branched into several schools: psychoanalytic, humanistic, Gestalt, each traditionally favoring long-term intervention. Um, and so you have those schools like logotherapy, Gestalt therapy, CBT. I can talk about all of them, but I'd like to say also that in this context, clinical hypnotherapists are not beholden to a single theoretical orientation. You can promiscuously take from other schools and use it for yourself. So you can, and you're not beholden to any of them. You are free agents. You are free. Hypnosis is a fantasia in altered states of consciousness. It offers a natural bridge connecting the unconscious explorations of psychoanalysis with a symptom-focused pragmatism. However, here's my question. It can take lifetimes to learn these disciplines. And so, if you want, a criticism of hypnotherapy is that it's atheoretical. I'm going to continue learning about hypnosis for the rest of my life. And how I see it is, I see it as if it was more popular, it could get rid of the broader neurosis in our lives. And I think I've said enough.
Thanks very much, Michael. Thank you.